So I think normally when you work with light, you have to really be able to control perhaps more of the environmental aspects of an installation than you would otherwise. And so obviously when you have somebody else's work in the same space, you have to strike a balance. And I think that Luca's proposition to light the work of Simone Forti only with my lamps was a difficult proposition in a way. But yeah, right from the beginning, Luca, when he asked me to be involved in the show, had a very clear idea of what he wanted from the installation, which I suppose is a little bit unusual. But the premise was that Simone's work would be lit entirely by my lamplight, which I was excited by, but also raised a number of challenges, I suppose. Would there be enough light in order to do justice to her work? Would my, lights by their nature attract attention, like moths to a flame or something? We gravitate towards lights in a dark room. We fixate on them like a fire in a house. And so I think I didn't want to set up a scenario where, because of the low lighting and because of the presence of lamps, the walls were in the background somehow. And so I think right from the beginning, I tried to think of ways that I could actively engage with the work of Simone, but at the same time, she made her work historically. It's the two works exist obviously completely independently, but it seemed like in order to help attract attention to the wall, I needed to push against the wall a little bit more than I perhaps normally would have done. I think there was an added benefit that the glazing in her pictures is reflective rather than non-reflective, which is usually more common in museum settings. And so I could work with the reflections to hold the image of the lamp light, so that actually the lamps, rather than existing in space isolated, could also exist in her work on the wall for a split second until you move, and then the lamp disappears and you're left with just the drawing. So they act as a kind of lure, not just onto themselves, but also to the works on the wall. And I think that was something that was, obviously I could never have anticipated. It was something that was just fortuitous in the glazing of her framing. I think there's also a kind of added tension, I suppose, that like a productive tension, that her work is emphatically about people's bodies in space and movement in space. And obviously she's best known for performance, her work with performance, and there's no physical bodies in here, but there only are diagrams or the activity of her own body through the rubbings, or the depiction of her and her father, or their kind of physical bodies within the images, that I think also set up an opportunity for me to maybe play with my sculptures as if they were figures, a little bit more than I know. I always think of them as partly figurative. I think that's something that I never set out to make them figurative, but I tend to prefer them at the height of a body, where maybe the peperino stone base is somewhere in the region of the belly, or perhaps in the region of the heart when you look at it, that of course depending on your height, but that the alabaster component falls somewhere a little bit higher. It has something more in relation to your head, so that in setting up a kind of physical equivalency between the viewer and the object because of the height of the pedestal, I think it makes them somehow more figurative. And I think with this particular body of work that I made really for this show, actually, there were some sculptures that were half made, that were partly conceived, but really this body of work emerged in anticipation of this exhibition. So I guess I had the works that Simone was going to show kind of swirling in my brain or in my subconscious, at least for the second part of me making them. And I think probably I wasn't necessarily conscious, but I definitely was thinking about the figurative aspect much more than I perhaps normally would have done. And in the end, I think that they've probably become much more figurative. So I think that's also something that I could never have imagined, that by being in an exhibition with somebody, partly arbitrarily because of an invitation from a curator, my work could in some way actually even change. It could kind of follow that prompt and evolve in a way that I hadn't expected, which I think is probably one of the things that excites me most, particularly because I'm mostly work with installations that are so controlling of space that very rarely anybody wants to be in the same space as me. I tend to make works that are quite independent from other artists and other artworks. It's pretty hard to kind of strike a balance usually, and I think as much as I thought it was going to be a challenge, I think it's credit to Luca that he realized it was possible. Hopefully it's possible. Hopefully it's succeeded. But I think that in some senses, both elements of the pieces are made from stone, but very, very different stones with completely different characteristics. Stones that have probably never really been conjoined or placed together. And I think both of them grow out of completely different necessities and periods of my life. The peperino, really, my relationship with peperino comes from a time I spent in the countryside near Rome, in the Viterbese countryside, in Tuscia, where the predominant stone of the region is peperino. It's a kind of volcanic stone. So the peperino is really from the eruption of the Monte Cimino, and it's the solidified and compressed ash and spurts of lava. So the pepe of the stone, the peperino of the stone, is the solidified lava. So it's basaltic. It's from basalt, and then the tufo is the volcanic ash that's combined with the peperino. And it's really one of the stones, I guess, most prevalent in Rome. It's one of the stones, because it's so easy to carve, that has been used for thousands of years. And if you live at all in Viterbese, all the villages are made from the same stone, all the rocks, where all the springs come out of the same stone. It's really everywhere. It's a completely ubiquitous kind of stone there, that I think it's interesting when you live for an extended period of time, and I lived for about 4 years in this region, you really start to kind of absorb something of the materials, whether it's the trees or in this case, the stone that's so prevalent. Something becomes embedded in your experience there, it becomes so familiar that it even takes on a kind of emotional significance. So when I feel peperino, I feel in some senses, even when I see it, I feel at home. I feel it evokes, the smell of it even evokes the place I lived in. So I think it's people don't really think of stone usually in those kind of terms. I don't ever hear people talk about the smell of stone, but the alabaster has a really particular scent. That when you work it, it's really kind of prevalent. And the alabaster really comes from my time in Egypt, where that I've been visiting mostly to source alabaster, but it's really has such specific properties you can't find in stones elsewhere, that I'm led actually to the place for the stone in contrast, I guess, to the peperino, that really is about my time in a place where I discovered this stone. And in the end, they just made this kind of perfect coupling that I suppose is the kind of genesis of this body of work.